Liberty in our lifetimes in a free state of our own. That's the vision. That's the dream. And we are building it in New Hampshire. I'm Eric Brakey, your host and renegade statesman for the Porcupine Report. Welcome to your source for porcupine news and free-range conversation on matters of liberty. All right, let's hop into the show. Hello and welcome to all you porcupines. This is, as always, your host, your renegade statesman, your executive director of the Free State Project, Eric Brakey, for episode 53 of the Porcupine Report. As always, we are bringing you a new episode mostly every single Wednesday at 7 o'clock p.m. And be sure to, wherever you consume your podcasts, we put this on X and Facebook and Spotify and YouTube, and wherever you are consuming this show, please be sure to like, share, comment, subscribe, whatever makes sense for the platform that you're on. And please do share the show with your friends who love liberty so we can continue growing our audience and spreading the good news that liberty continues to rise on the ascendant in the free state of New Hampshire. A few items of news before we get into our conversation today, which I'm looking forward to. First of all, I have to say I'm a little exhausted. We had a great time this weekend for what was almost kind of like the soft launch of our Free State Project Ambassador program. Thank you to all of our patrons who have invested in our Granite Gulch initiative to make it possible. We crammed 9 Free Staters into a van, and we drove for 12 hours. We left the Free State behind. It was a very unfortunate, but we had to do it. We drove for 12 hours all the way down to the Imperial City, Washington, D.C. We passed through some of the most tyrannical states that exist in the U.S. on the Freedom in the 50 States Index. I'm talking about Massachusetts and the Empire State, New York. We passed through Delaware and Maryland. We even, unfortunately, had to stop in New Jersey for gas. And can you believe it? They don't even let you pump your gas in New Jersey. What kind of statism is this? That's why one of the many reasons why they're ranked the 49th least free state in America. I'm sure there are other reasons too. Anyway, but we made it. We arrived at the Students for Liberty conference. We had a great time interacting with hundreds of young libertarian students and letting them know about what's happening in New Hampshire. And this might be the very place where they would like to plant their flag and plant their roots and build their life and their future right here in the freest state in America with so many liberty-loving communities. And it was a great time. I got to speak from the main stage. We had a booth in the exhibition hall, and people keep telling me, and I think I saw enough to believe that it's true, that the Free State Project was the sponsor there in the exhibition hall that got the most curiosity and interest. And we invited a lot of people, hundreds of people, to come out and join us for PorcFest and Liberty Forum coming up in the months ahead. So hopefully we'll have some new folks coming to visit the Free State and get a little taste of what we are building here in the libertarian homeland. And to that effect, I also want to mention, as I said last week, we had a great Porcupine Day. Thank you to everyone who came out. We are now looking forward to and preparing for some of the events we have ahead. Right ahead of us, coming up in late April, the April 24th through the 27th, we are hosting the New Hampshire Liberty Forum in Concord, New Hampshire. Actually, earlier today, I was there with some of our production team at the site, the Grapponi Conference Center, as we're going over some of the details for the layout and everything, and I'm very excited. And I'm also excited to tell you some news that we've announced some of our first keynote speaker for the New Hampshire Liberty Forum, and that is going to be the great Jeff Deist. He's going to be our Saturday evening keynote speaker for the VIP dinner. To have access to that dinner, you need to get a VIP ticket for Liberty Forum to hear his solo remarks. He'll also be participating in some of the general sessions on Saturday. So Jeff Deist, if you're not familiar with him, he was the very last chief of staff for the great Ron Paul during his his time in Congress. He served for about a decade as the president of the Mises Institute, and now he's general counsel for monetary metals. And he's a great thinker, someone who thinks a lot about federalism, how to promote the ability of states like New Hampshire to chart their own course free from the controls of the tyrannies of Washington, D.C., and how that we can use sensible monetary policy to restore our economic freedoms. So be sure to come out and check out Jeff Deist. Get your tickets at nhlibertyforum.com. And I will also say we announced our 10 presenters for our what we're calling our Liberty for Real dialogue sessions. So these are folks who are presenting what they see as challenges on the road to emerging free societies, and proposing potential solutions to those challenges. That's what they're presenting, followed by a brainstorming session with participants on how to improve upon those solutions. We've got a lot of local homegrown talent from here in the Free State who are presenting, as well as some folks coming from all other parts of the country. I'm particularly curious to hear from Matt McCaw, who's been a past guest on this program, the executive director of the Greater Idaho Movement. He is traveling across the country to visit us in New Hampshire and present on the work they've been doing as Eastern Oregon has been trying to break away and join Idaho to break free from the progressive control in their state capital. Very fascinating. In fact, you can go back to the previous episode of the Porcupine Report to catch that for a little taste of what we might hear at Liberty Forum. So again, grab your tickets for Liberty Forum. We really would love to have you join us. And I do also want to share another piece of news. So Dennis Pratt, who's really contributed the vision for what Liberty Forum is this year, particularly around these dialogue sessions that we're doing, had been the lead producer for Liberty Forum, but has stepped back for some health reasons. And I'm operating now as the lead producer for Liberty Forum. As Dennis goes through some, I don't want to share too many details, but he's been a regular on this show. And if you know Dennis, just know he's facing some health issues right now. And I hope that you keep him in your thoughts and prayers as he works on his recovery. So please keep Dennis Pratt in mind. And I look forward to when he's feeling well again, that he will be a guest again on this show. And finally, I will just say we have some really exciting developments taking place with PorcFest as we prepare for that. I'm not ready to announce some of those yet, so I'm just teasing it a little bit. So keep watching this program, or be sure to go to fsp.org and sign up for our regular newsletters. Actually, we're delivering great quality original updates from the Free State Project to your email inbox every single week now. So sign up at fsp.org, and I write that personally. You're getting it direct from me. It's not one of these boring newsletters. It's fun, engaging stuff. So sign up for that on fsp.org to always be in the know. All right. I think that's enough news from me. Let's get into today's conversation. So I am really pleased to welcome back to the Porcupine Report a guest we've had on once before. His name is Representative Michael Eric Granger. Not only is he a state representative and a Free Stater, he is also the political director of the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance. And with the state legislature in session right now and so many things moving very quickly, I thought it would be nice to have him to come back on and give us an update on what exactly is happening in the New Hampshire State House. So let's welcome to the program, Representative Granger.
Thanks for having me.
You know, Representative Granger, before we get into the substance, I think I was mentioning to you previously that it was revealed to me by one of the individuals. I think it was Scott Scheller, who was one of our ambassadors to the Students for Liberty Conference, LibertyCon this weekend, that you go by Michael Granger these days, but your middle name is Eric, and you used
I actually go by Granger.
Now you go by Granger. Well,
I just don't call me Sally.
All right. Well,
or Rebecca. That one's right out.
I have a bone to pick with you, Representative, as a fellow Eric. My understanding is that you spell your name with a K, and I
Yes, I
spell my
spelled
name
the
with a C.
correct way.
Well,
It's correct with a K.
This is the thing. This is the thing. All Erics know this, but outside of the Erics, people generally don't know. There is a long-standing war between the C Erics and the K Erics, and I have a natural distrust of politicians. I thought I was warming up to you until I learned that you're a K Eric. Now I don't know if I can believe a word you say. How do you respond to that?
Well, Eric with a K is spelled the Viking way, and the reason you guys hate us so is because we keep raiding your farms and villages and seacoast shanty towns, and frankly, you deserve it for building so close to the sea.
I see. It sounds like justification, like so many looters who want to take from those who rightfully earn what they build. But you know what? I don't
Pay
think
the
this
iron
is something.
price.
Well, I don't think we're going to resolve this today. So let's get into what exactly is going on. First of all, thank you for coming back on the program. I did get a lot of feedback last time you were on that people really enjoyed the update. I don't have my cowboy hat with me this time, but
well, I appreciate it.
Yeah. So anyway,
not having the cowboy hat is fine too.
Yeah. I wouldn't want to intimidate you with how cool that cowboy hat is.
Mm-hmm.
So we are now just over a month into the New Hampshire, the opening of the New Hampshire legislature. Things have been moving. I know I saw you up there when we were all testifying on the Defend the Guard bill in the State Federal Relations Committee. I guess just in a big picture sense, how would you describe where things are right now at this moment in time for the cause of liberty in the New Hampshire State House?
We're on good footing, and I think that this is going to be a landmark year in many ways. The big deal right now is that all the financial note bills are being handled first, because we need to handle any bill that in any way affects money before the budget is prepared. Right. So we take care of those bills first. That means this is crunch time. Any bill that has anything to do with money whatsoever needs to be handled soon. And so it has been incredibly hectic starting in January and working our way through February to just get testimony on those bills. And we've only had one House session to actually vote on those bills, because a lot of those bills we're going to have to vote on twice. They're going to have to go over to the Finance Committee. And unfortunately, Defend the Guard has been retained. And the logic for it being retained, and for your viewers, what that means is they're going to hold it in committee for 1 year, and then next year they're going to bring it to the floor. And this is because the proponents of the bill, as well as the people on the committee, they want to see if the new Secretary of Defense comes through with a letter in support of Defend the Guard. For those who are unaware, Hegseth, who is the current Defense Secretary, has spoken in favor of Defend the Guard in the past, but that was before he was Defense Secretary. And there's a thought that maybe he doesn't support it so much now that he's in a position where it matters. And so we're hoping that perhaps he sends us a letter or something along those lines. And then next year, if we have that, then we say, well, the Secretary of Defense has blessed this bill. Therefore, we should be able to pass it without any funding issues. But it has been incredibly hectic. And I'm looking forward to not being this hectic anymore.
Well, it certainly is an interesting development to have a newly confirmed U.S. Secretary of Defense who is on the record supporting Defend the Guard. But you're right. Once people get into positions of power, you never know all the influences around them and how quickly opinions can change. Hopefully that he will stand strong there. It would be certainly nice if every time a Defend the Guard bill comes before a state legislature that the Pentagon stops sending 4-star generals to lobby against it. I imagine a friendly Secretary of Defense on that may stem the tide of 4-star generals I
don't know what the I remember when I was in the military, you weren't supposed to be involved in politics in uniform. I don't know if that's just a lower enlisted thing, or if that's something that applies to officers as well. I know they are the aristocracy, but I don't know. It just seems like strange to have generals speaking in uniform like that.
Rules for thee, but not for me. Sounds like
so.
I mean, I guess I did hear, not to brag about other states, but I did hear. I don't know the full details here. But I heard that our great liberty legislator in Virginia Delegate Nick Freitas pushed Defend the Guard through there, and they say it passed 99-0 in Virginia, which is stunning to hear, and almost it makes me wonder what the context is, if this was like it went under the hammer and they expect the Senate to kill it and they just didn't want to vote. So I don't know what the context is there. And it sounds like there's some good movement happening in Wyoming as well, where they had a huge liberty. They had a good year for liberty in their state legislative elections in Wyoming this year. So it seems like New Hampshire has some competition to be the first, which, at the end of the day, it would be nice to brag that New Hampshire is the first. But at the end of the day, I suppose what's really important is that we start to break the dam on the opposition to Defend the Guard. And I've always thought as soon as one state goes, it's going to be like the floodgates opening up, because everyone's just afraid to go it alone and to be the subject of retaliation by the federal government.
I'm glad that we have competition in this way. I would certainly rather have competition over this than something else.
Well, it's certainly when you're challenging the federal government and you're trying to nullify their unconstitutional policies, it certainly is nice when it's not one state going it alone. So it's nice to know that these fights are happening on so many fronts, and inevitably someone's going to go first. And if nothing else, New Hampshire, who knows, could be Wyoming. And if it is them, good for them. We will congratulate them, and hopefully it will empower more state legislators in New Hampshire to follow suit. And if nothing else, New Hampshire has really, I think, sealed itself in the history books on Defend the Guard, not just for Daniel Webster, his cry, in the early years of the Republic that states will have to do this, they will have to intercede, but also the knowledge that when the New Hampshire House passed it, that's what led to Pete Hegseth on Fox News saying he supports Defend the Guard, and who knew he was going to be Secretary of Defense. So anyway,
I don't even think he knew at that point.
Yeah, I can't imagine he had any idea. So
that's not one of those positions people prepare all their lives for.
Well, I imagine some career bureaucrats do, but
hopefully they don't get it.
When you're an outsider, you don't typically have this on your bingo card.
Yeah. What do you have on your bingo card, by the way?
Live free and thrive in New Hampshire. That's it.
Okay, so you didn't build a bingo card this year?
Not this year.
Okay.
All right. So thank you so that's the update on Defend the Guard. Let me ask you, so I know that something that was majorly at stake in this election was the interest and dividends tax. Mm-hmm. And with Democrats failing on all levels, on the state level anyway, to capture the House or the Senate or the governorship, the interest and dividends tax has fully phased out and is dead and gone. What have been the reactions to that from Democrats in the state House?
I think they want more taxes so right now there is a budget surplus, and my general opinion, or not budget surplus, a budget deficit, the opposite. I misspoke. My general opinion is that if you have a budget deficit, you cut spending. And when you have a budget surplus, you cut taxes. And if you zigzag between those two long enough, eventually you're going to have a very small government. And that'll be very, very nice. The typical budget for New Hampshire is about $15 billion, roughly. We're going to see if we can lower that significantly this year. And the interest and dividends tax being gone gives us the justification to do that, because now, due to a lack of revenue, we need to cut spending. So this biennium is a spending cutting year, and it also lines up well with national priorities. So we have DOGE at the federal level, we have COGE at the New Hampshire level, the Commission of Government Efficiency, set up by our new governor, Kelly Ayotte. And every sign that she's putting out seems to indicate that she wants to clean house and really go over this budget and just make sure that the New Hampshire government is spending tax dollars efficiently in a morally acceptable manner. And if that means that we're cutting spending, I certainly hope that we do. And one thing that people outside of the legislature can do is ask their representatives to support cutting $1 billion from the current budget, the last budget that we passed, and include in that with at least $300 million coming from the Department of Health and Human Services. If we can do that, if we can rally behind that, it increases the chances of it actually coming true. That'll be a huge budget cut. The last time we've had major budget cuts was a couple years ago. We kind of had a not very good budget that passed last time, but this would undo everything bad that happened with the last budget and then some. It would be a huge break.
Let me ask you. So let me ask you for some more details on like specific things you think can be cut. So 300 million out of the Department of Health and Human Services. I mean, that sounds like a big chunk of change. Where do you find that? I know that like New Hampshire is like a Medicaid expansion state. Are you talking about like tackling and repealing that, or where are you going to find this 300 million?
I don't know that we have the political capital to get rid of Medicaid expansion, unfortunately. I would love to see Medicaid expansion go away. However, I don't believe that, frankly, I don't know that we have the votes for it. That might be it's that program is sort of like Social Security, and that once it's embedded, it's very, very hard to get rid of without a lot of people pushing back very hard. Now, that being said, I would support it if that were to hit the floor, but we'll see. The Department of Health and Human Services takes about half of the New Hampshire state budget. That is why, but I also want to give people on the finance committee as much leeway as possible in determining what programs to go and what programs to keep. There is a lot of just junk in the Department of Health and Human Services, stuff that we don't need, stuff like refugee resettlement programs and things like that we definitely should get rid of. And as well as stuff that is just coronavirus holdovers, right? Like, there's a lot of stuff to be taken out of there. So I have a bill this year to get rid of the Vaccine Association. New Hampshire's a little strange because we have this corporation that was built by the legislature to handle the buying and selling of vaccines. And what this does is it grants the Department of Health and Human Services a de facto monopoly on vaccines. And then they use that as sort of a funnel to collect vaccine registrations. And I don't know about you, I don't register my guns. I'm sure as hell not registering my vaccines. And I know some people like them and some people don't like them. And frankly, it's none of the government's business whether you're getting them or not. So I have a bill to do that. That should save a pretty hefty chunk of change and also allow people the freedom to purchase vaccines directly from the source. If they want to go to Pfizer and buy a vaccine, they're going to be allowed to have that. Good luck doing that now with the Vaccine Association. But there is a lot to cut from the Department of Health and Human Services, and that's just a sampling. But I want to keep the requirements vague. That way, the amount of money that we can cut is as big as we can get away with. If the Finance Committee can find things to cut and it equals $300 million worth of cuts from the Department of Health and Human Services at least, and a total of at least $1 billion from the overall budget, then I will vote for the budget. If they won't, I will not. And there's a pretty sizable chunk of Republicans who are following suit. Hopefully that means that we'll be able to get what we want and have a much smaller budget.
A few follow-up questions. I mean, first of all, I will say as far as refugee resettlement goes, I don't know the details of these programs, but certainly seems like a fair place to cut. Yeah. I've always been a big believer that if we are going to have social safety net services, it should be for the citizens and not used as a magnet to attract people from all over the world.
Right? If that, right? Because
if social safety net services are going to exist, let's at least focus on not just for citizens, but also for like citizens who are in fact the truly most vulnerable. Adults with intellectual disabilities. I have a deep, compassion for. The severely disabled, our seniors at the end of their working age where they don't have a cushion to fall back on. I mean, I think these are why we created these social safety net services in the first place. And by we, I mean, they were created in the past.
People 100 years ago.
Right. And they were sold for the purpose of catching the most vulnerable. Instead, I think what we've seen in states around the country is that they've expanded to catch a lot of able-bodied adults who are capable of standing on their own 2 feet, but instead they get caught in this welfare trap where and oftentimes you get on the system and then the system itself is built in such a way that it traps you there with welfare cliffs that penalize you if you ever try to get ahead. and try to get a higher paying job and get on the road to independence. So I'm always for that. I will say, as far as refugee resettlement goes, though, if you are someone who is a refugee from one of the tyrannical, authoritarian 49 states, and you're a liberty-loving person, you're welcome. We will help you as a refugee resettle in New Hampshire. You just don't need a government program for that. And we are glad to help libertarians resettle in New Hampshire. But
we have the welcome wagons.
Yeah, with a welcome wagon. But as far as so you say cut $1 billion from the budget. First of all, how big overall is the New Hampshire state budget? What, as a percentage, what would cutting $1 billion in spending?
Over 5%, less than 10%. I believe the last budget was 15 or 16 billion, somewhere around there. These are big numbers. And the funny thing is, if you look at the budgets long enough, eventually you start to contextualize money being spent elsewhere. So this is an important skill. If people have a trouble, grokking large numbers, right? What's the difference between $1 million and $1 billion? You can't imagine the difference in your mind. But if you deal with budgets long enough, it actually becomes fairly intuitive. So, for instance, if you look at how much money they spent, like $800 billion in Ukraine, and just how many New Hampshire state budgets is that?
Yeah.
That's sort of how you can do it. But it's over 5%, but less than 10%. It's like around there somewhere. It's like 7-ish. It's big.
Okay. How active are you seeing this COGE? The Commission on Government Efficiency that Governor Ayotte has formed. Are you seeing much action from these folks? I know that the head of it is the former governor who welcomed the Free Staters here. Yeah,
Craig Benson. Yeah, Governor Craig Benson was a wonderful guy, and he kind of invited the Free State Project in here back in the day. But he was interesting because he had certain rules that he established that he's still famous for. So, for instance, if a meeting was going to be happening at 9 a.m., he would lock the doors at 9 a.m. flat, and he would be in a meeting room without any chairs. So they would have to do stand-up desks, because if you were late, you weren't taking the meeting seriously enough. And if you needed to sit down, then you weren't working fast enough. He was an interesting character. He made a lot of money in the private sector and became a governor for a term. But yeah, he's involved, and I'm excited to hear that, because I'd like to meet him one day. That'd be pretty cool. I've only heard good things about him. I haven't seen much activity from Code, but I don't know. They don't get very involved in the legislature so far. I think they're working very different from how Doge acts.
Okay, so they're just kind of like quietly going through the budget on the executive branch side.
I'm not sure. Maybe.
All right. Well, hopefully we hear more.
Stuff.
Another several big items that people keep talking about being on the table. Of course, there's I think probably the one issue that Republicans have the clearest mandate on of any issue, which is school choice. There's legislation to expand education freedom accounts to make them universal, that any family can access them regardless of their income threshold. I say that Republicans have the clearest mandate on this because Republicans campaigned for it and Democrats actively campaigned against it. So this was very much an issue that was on the minds of voters because both sides were talking about it, and then Democrats got demolished at the ballot box, indicating that this is something the people want. So what do you have to say about the state of education freedom accounts, and what might we expect in the legislature this year?
I absolutely love education freedom accounts, and I'll tell you why. It's because the public education system is a holdover from what eventually became what we call the Austrian model. No, excuse me, the Prussian model. I'm confusing economics and schooling.
Yeah. Don't hate on the Austrians. We love the Austrians.
Yeah, Germany and Europe, it all looks the same to me. I'm an American. I have a privilege to not understand Europe. But this model that we sort of imported, it is so out of step with how schools were run in the 1800s, and it has not advanced education very well for the past 100 years. The schools that we have now, they have a lot of technological gobbledygook and all that jazz, but they're still fundamentally modeled in a way that is not conducive to people learning. Now, in New Hampshire, we have a constitutional requirement to cherish education. And a court case, famously, the Claremont decision, came out, and the judge at that time, I believe this was in the early 90s, said that the term cherish, as applied in the New Hampshire Constitution, means finance. And so court cases since then have indicated that according to the New Hampshire Constitution, we have to spend a certain amount of state money on education. The problem with that is that if we keep spending it on the public education that is the more old-fashioned Prussian model, like the public schools, they're not ever going to have good outcomes, because as everybody knows who's listening to this show anyway, you can throw as much money as you want on the public schools. It's not going to do an ounce of good for the academics. And so we have this thing called
putting water in a leaky bucket, and
it's a sieve. The education freedom counts that we have, what they allow you to do is have the state portion of the tuition funding for the schools follow the student. So that means that if we spend, if the state is spending $3,000 to send that kid to a public school, and the kids comes out of the public school and says, I'm not going to public school anymore, I'm going to go do something else, and the family signs up for the Education Freedom Account program, the state portion of the school tuition follows the student, and they can spend it on educational expenses outside. This means that if they want to go to a private school, this is essentially like a $3,500 coupon for a private school. We do have some fairly illustrious private schools in New Hampshire. If they want to homeschool or do something very similar but legally distinct from homeschooling, then this would pay for the curriculum, it would pay for the equipment, everything else that you would need to do in order to do that. Books, writing utensils, that sort of thing. This is an incredibly important thing that we need to get people to start doing, because as much as homeschooling is valuable and useful, if you're still paying money to the public school system and you're not getting that money back to you, right? That money's gone. It's being put into the leaky sieve. It's going to line the pocket of union teachers. But if we can get more and more students and more New Hampshire households to use these education freedom accounts, then it starts looking a little strange that we're spending any money on these public schools if no one goes to them. And that's ultimately the goal. We can't yank the rug out on public schools because people are depending on them. But the public schools are awful. They cannot actually perform the function that they're there to do. They cannot educate the public. They don't do that. They indoctrinate the public, and they addle the brains of young kids, but they do not actually provide a serious education to them. So since they're not able to do that, and we can't just yank it out, we need to move people over to something better. And the way we move them to something better is by moving them to education freedom accounts. And maybe one day we'll be able to get rid of the education freedom accounts too. And instead we'll just have homeschooling, and it will have private sector management of education, and families can sort of do it the old fashioned way, as they did in the 1800s when the New Hampshire Constitution still said cherish. But as of now, we need to move people over to that. And I think that we can greatly expand it. The House's position is to have universal education freedom account access. So what that means is right now, you need to earn 350% of the poverty line or below in order to qualify for it. We have means testing. And what we need is, we want this to be for everyone. It doesn't matter if you make too much money, too little money. Everyone should be entitled to have the state portion of their tuition refunded to them, so their kids can learn and get a real education.
You know, it certainly makes sense to me that the people who are actually paying the taxes should be able to get their tax dollars back, and not just the people who aren't paying the taxes. So that makes sense to me. And I'm very supportive of this program. That said, let me play devil's advocate for a moment and ask you, I know a question that a challenge I get from some in the homeschooling communities who are skeptical of this program, where they argue that if you are making all these taxpayer funds available to families, then the strings attached and the curriculum requirements of those things are not just going to exist in the government schools now. They're going to start working their way into all forms of education. Like we see with federal dollars, they always come with strings attached. State dollars, perhaps one day strings will become attached to them. And certainly there have been Democratic legislators who have put in bills seeking to attach strings to these funds. My understanding is those proposals have been consistently rejected. But it's certainly, I imagine it's not something they're going to give up on. What do you say to those who might argue that this is could lead to government putting more restrictions on homeschooling?
We intentionally rigged. I wasn't there for it, so I shouldn't say we. But the laws were intentionally rigged that the EFA program is legally distinct from homeschooling and is a separate chapter of law. So any regulations that apply to the Education Freedom Account do not by default apply to homeschooling. In order for it to apply to homeschooling as well, what they would need to do is have a separate law in a separate chapter of the law books that would apply to homeschooling. So while people are right to be concerned about overregulation coming with strings or regulation coming with taxpayer money, or it's certainly easy to imagine that since the Education Freedom Account program is legally distinct, the push in order to have it affect homeschooling is much greater than it is to just push it in the EFA program. So if you keep in mind that there are two legally distinct programs, you have the Education Freedom Accounts over here, and you have the homeschooling over here, and that any regulations added on EFAs do not apply to homeschooling unless you have a separate bill, and then it's a lot easier to work with. So if you do not trust the EFA program and you don't want to open yourself up to that or become reliant on it, more power to you if you homeschool. My big thing is just don't send them to the public school, please.
Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate you for that, and I certainly some may critique me on this, and that's fine. But I certainly always think of the wisdom of don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And right now we have a very broken system, and we need programs that help us transition away from that broken system. And certainly, the so many government programs are designed in such a way that we take taxpayer money and we funnel it into bureaucracies. And bureaucracies have all of the worst incentives. They don't ultimately have an economic incentive to care about the quality of the product that they are delivering or the cost to the taxpayers who are paying for it. And so you get mediocre results. And that's what we've seen in government schools for decades and decades now. Mediocre results, no matter how much money is funneled into them. And sometimes it seems like the more money we funnel in, the more the results become even more mediocre. So if we accept the premise, and I get that some don't, but this is the reality that we're in. If we accept the premise that taxpayer dollars are going to be used for educational purposes, for educating the children of the public, then it certainly makes a lot more sense to me that those dollars go to the families who do have a direct interest in the outcome for their child than to the bureaucracies that do not have a direct interest in the outcome of that child. So I personally think it's wonderful. That is my personal opinion, not the opinion of the Free State Project, which is a 501c3 nonprofit that does not lobby for bills. So But I appreciate you explaining in depth kind of the state of all that. Two other bills that I know are kind of going on. There's the right to work legislation that is currently in the legislature. I know certainly when I saw the election results turn out the way that they did, with Republicans now having a 40-seat majority in the House, a supermajority in the Senate, and a governor that is on the record supporting right to work, it certainly seems to me that there's never been a clearer pathway to right to work passing in New Hampshire, which would make New Hampshire the first state in New England with a right to work law. But I'm not following things on the day-to-day like you are. What are you seeing on the ground with right to work? And I understand that the public hearing has already taken place. What are you seeing there?
Well, I'm on the labor committee that handles right to work. And I was a big fan of pushing this first year right off the bat. Once I saw those numbers, I was like, oh, well, we're doing right to work this year, just like you did. This is like you look at numbers like that and you're like, well, we got to get this done. So for anyone who is not aware, right to work is a legislation that has passed in many states. But the basic premise is that if you are not a member of a union, you should not be forced to pay dues to a union. And this is important because since the days of FDR, we have been in a scenario where unions can opt for universal representation, meaning that if you have a workplace, you got 10 people working there, if 50% plus one, so 6 people decide to unionize, then what they can do is they can force the other 4 to accept this contract that they come up with. And they can say that our union of our 6 people represents all the workers, whether they're members of the union or not. And so since Taft-Hartley, we can actually have people not join the union if they don't want to. But because of the contracts that are set up, they are still forced in many cases to pay the union. And they use the excuse that, oh, but the union has negotiated your contract. We are the ones, you get the same contract we do. Don't we get a fair cut? And to them, I say that they are not free riders. They are, in fact, captive passengers. They are hostages. And they are not allowed, legally not allowed, due to federal law, to negotiate their own contracts. And so that's sort of what we're seeing. And day to day, the party breakdown is basically like this. I think 100% of Democrats will vote against right to work. I think that the overwhelming majority of Republicans will vote in favor of it. I think if it passes the House, then it will almost certainly pass the Senate. And Governor Ayotte has, if I understand that she actually sponsored national right to work in the past, she's almost certainly going to sign it. So it's a fight to get it through the House right now. And we figure out what the numbers are going to be this Thursday. We're going to be voting on it. We'll see.
So that means if with like a 40-seat majority, if everyone is present, which of course is never the case, but let's imagine that everyone is present. If 20 Republicans defect, then right to work fails.
We have a tie. So if people, this is if you have a 40-seat majority and 20 Republicans defect, that means that the actual numbers, it's not that you're down 20 votes, you're down 40 because they have a 2-vote swing. If they vote for your legislation, then you're up 1. But if they vote against it, you're down 1. You're not at 0. They can also walk. What that means is they simply don't vote on this legislation. They go to the bathroom instead. And I
saw that happen a lot with Democrats who didn't want to support the Democrat agenda in Maine in recent years. Whenever a Democrat priority like abortion up to birth or gun control was at risk of failure, suddenly the Democrats who didn't want to vote for it disappeared rather than voting against it.
There's times to do it, right? Like, yeah. So I remember, I'll admit, I walked on a bill once. This was a bill it was basically a state law saying that local municipalities couldn't make laws saying that you had to wear a top. And I understand there's some people who think that people should be able to walk around naked wherever. But once I saw the list of towns that had rules against walking around topless, they were all places with beaches. And I was like, okay, well, if there's a public beach. And then I was like, well, there's a liberty issue as well. It's like, yeah, but I mean, if it's a public beach. And so I eventually decided, you know what? This isn't my issue. I'm just not going to vote on this one. So I'm undecided.
I bet your constituents will forgive you on that one. I don't imagine that was one of the most pressing issues of the time.
The bill failed anyway, but it was there's legitimate times that, and I'll admit to that one. I didn't vote on that one. And if someone wants to yell at me and say that I'm not a liberty guy because of that, you go right ahead. But when it comes to things that are of substance, like right to work, if someone is opposed to right to work, I would much rather them take a walk. Not because I'd rather them take a walk than vote against it. And there's certain, if Dems wanted to, because there may be some Dems who have had negative experiences with unions and know about the bullying and the abuse and the aggression that can sort of go on to make you toe the line within the union. And if they want to go for a walk, good luck. We're you know, I hope you have smooth sailing from here, and that nobody tries to slice your brake line or anything like that.
I will say, if there are any questioning state legislators out there watching, or just people in our audience who are on the fence on this issue, there are so many things that are said against right to work by the union bosses and those they command that are just not factually true.
Correct.
And at the end of the day, could make all the arguments about how, right to work does attract capital investment to a state and create more job opportunities and rising benefits for take-home pay. I mean, certainly you don't have to shell out a portion of your paycheck to a union that you don't feel is representing you. But ultimately, I think there's a real question of fairness in this more than anything. And people talk about power imbalances between employers and employees, and that's fair. That's fair to explore and to talk about. And I think there was a time and place where unions played a big role in helping to rebalance those things. But there is a power imbalance that exists as well between the union boss and the person who is forced to pay the union dues. Because when they say that the union boss represents the members of the union or the people forced to pay into the union, that's the same way that you might say that a U.S. senator represents everyone in the state. We all know that there are a lot of people who despise what that U.S. senator stands for and doesn't believe a single thing that they're doing on their behalf. But we are forced to have them as our representation anyway, even if they totally disregard what we want. Well, that's what union bosses get to do. If you can't get 50% plus one to vote out that union boss, they're going to keep taking your union dues, and they're going to be funneling it to political campaigns of candidates who despise you and everything you stand for. And that is, yeah, and all whatever your values are, if you are a small government conservative who is a working class person and you're forced to pay union dues, you are being forced to furnish funds to political candidates and political causes that you oppose, because there is not that direct accountability mechanism between the union boss and the working person that there would be if the working person can just say, I'm out. I'm not participating in this. You're not getting my money unless you take my concerns seriously. And that empowers the worker over the union boss. So, and
it's funny how the left is always in favor of workers' rights until it comes to their worker right not to join a union. Then suddenly they don't believe in the will of the workers anymore.
Absolutely. And you see in right to work states, there are plenty of unions in right to work states. In fact, they're more accountable. And I could go on. This has been a pet peeve issue of mine. So, all right. But I know
even if you don't, like, if you've never joined a union before or worked in a union, as soon as you actually get into the nitty gritty of right to work, it's just a heinous violation of what is right. And I've never been a union guy and I've never been an anti-union guy. But as soon as you start hearing people lie and lie and lie again about what right to work legislation does, and once you get into the actual and hear the stories of the people that have been forced to fund absolute nonsense, absolute crazy, like left-wing nut trash, and the situation that they're in and the way they're treated by the unions, it becomes an issue. If you focus on this issue, it can consume you. It is a very important issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is key to it's key to breaking the back of our political opponents who rely on getting these transfers from forced union dues to their campaigns. So
yeah, it's like the OG USAID.
Yes. Boy, we could have a whole episode on that. I do want to get to one final issue before we wrap up. We're at the 50-minute mark, and I know you and I both have commitments, so we can't go too long today. Vehicle inspections. This is a great pet peeve of so many people. I tell you, I had to deal with this in Maine. I'm disappointed. I come to New Hampshire. I'm going to have to continue dealing with it, or at least it seems like that for right now. You got to go get your vehicle inspected every year. And of course, let me not make the argument for it. I'll let you make the argument for it. Representative Granger, why should we repeal vehicle inspections? Do you want people's cars to break down on the road and people to die in fiery explosions from their uninspected cars? What is wrong with you?
How did you know? Are you a mind reader? No, so I'm sponsoring. I'm the prime sponsor on HB 649 this year to get rid of vehicle inspections. The data shows that of all the vehicle crashes that happen on the road and all the auto accidents, 2% are claimed, not actually, but claimed to have been component failure, meaning brakes stopped working, or whatever. The actual number is probably less than 0.5%. This is based on testimony from the guy who used to administer the inspection program here in New Hampshire. He is a wonderful guy. And the point of these inspections is less about trying to make sure vehicles are safe and not spewing noxious gases all over. It has more to do with finding problems with vehicles so the auto dealers can sell you a new car. And that is why, even though most states have gotten rid of the auto inspections, we still have them in New Hampshire because the auto dealers want to sell more cars. Not all of them. There's some auto dealers that aren't doing that. But they do make a lot of political contributions, and that's always been a bit of a headache. So we're hearing testimony on the bill tomorrow. I don't know. When's this episode going to air?
It's going to be airing on Wednesday at 7. So we are recording it 2 days in advance. So sorry, your public hearing has already passed. So I hope I hope everyone watching
it went well.
Premonition to show up for it.
Yeah, we're going to try to get as many people in there as possible. There's a little bit of bipartisan support because most Republicans support the bill. Some Democrats support the bill. And the reason some Democrats support the bill is because they see it as a punitive tax upon the poor. So you go to a shop, you have your 1998 Volkswagen Beetle. That's what I have, a 98 Volkswagen Beetle. And the shop says something along the lines of, oh, your air blower has only one setting. It needs to have 2. We need to replace that. And then you have to pay a crazy amount of money for a new blower and a new switch or whatever the case may be. And a lot of times there was nothing that was actually wrong, right? So maybe the defrost worked fine. Maybe it wasn't that big of a deal. I've heard horror stories about people who have had to replace entire transmissions, $4,000 transmissions, because of a faulty sensor. There's also stories about people who are told that their tires are out of spec. They go and measure manually. They're perfectly fine. They have another 5,000 miles on them, but they say, well, one of the tires is out of spec, therefore we need to replace all 4. And then, that's about $500 out the window right there.
So you're saying it becomes a bit of an extortion racket.
It's a bit of a racket. It's a scam. It's a bit, beyond that. I think it just is. And there are some honest shops out there. And if you ask around and you have Free Stater friends, they will be very happy to tell you which shops to go to get your vehicle inspected for real. There's the shops that you go to that will not inspect it for real. But if you move here, definitely hit up the community and figure out where it is. Or my bill passes and you don't have to worry about it at all.
All right. Well, let's hope it passes. I would look forward to not just the freedom to choose whether or not to wear a seatbelt on the road, but to take my car in to get repaired when it actually needs repairs.
Yep.
So, awesome. Is there anything else that we haven't covered that you would like to share with folks about what's going on in the legislature before we wrap up today?
Well, we have the WHO bill coming up. And so that is a bill to prevent the World Health Organization, the United Nations, and the World Economic Forum from dictating how bureaucrats in New Hampshire apply laws. So if you'll remember during the coronavirus days, the Rona days, there were a lot of school boards, municipalities, and things like that that cited the World Health Organization as an authority and saying, well, we need to implement all these rules, because the World Health Organization, they're an authority and they make law and whatnot. This is just a bill that says, no, they do not. You do not have to enforce such things. And then people will have to rely on actual laws in the actual state of New Hampshire before they start saying, put a mask on. We're probably not going to have that happen, though, because let's face it, New Hampshire is not exactly the most Rona compliant state out there.
All right. Well, Representative Granger, where can people find and follow you? And also, being the political director of the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance, where can people learn more about the NHLA? And if they want to get involved in in advocating for liberty in the legislature, I'm sure that's a great organization they should search out.
Well, the nhliberty.org, nhliberty.org. That is the NHLA website. If you want to follow me in particular, at Granger4NH on X, down there, right there it goes. Yep. And I'm on the Twitter, and I'm not on Facebook, but I am on Twitter, and you can follow me there and see the memes and send me memes. I would appreciate that.
All right. Send them all the memes. Flood this man with memes. All right. Representative Granger, really appreciate it. You're welcome on anytime, even if you spell Eric with a K. It's very offensive to me. I'm very troubled by it, but I suppose I'll look past it for the sake of working together with intolerable people on areas of common ground. Even a K, Eric, I'll tolerate for the sake of liberty. So,
well, thanks for having me on.
I appreciate it. It is really a pleasure talking with you, and thank you for all the work you do, both with the NHLA and in the state legislature.
Good luck.
All right. All right, everyone. That's the show. Thank you so much for joining us. We will be back next Wednesday. Of course, I want to remind you again, get your tickets for the New Hampshire Liberty Forum. It's coming up April 24th through the 27th. Jeff Deist is going to be our Saturday night keynote speaker. We're doing a Soho Forum debate on Saturday as well between myself and former guest of this program, Andrew Heaton, author of the book Tribalism is Dumb. We are going to be debating in a Soho Forum debate moderated by Gene Epstein. We're going to be debating whether libertarians should focus their time and energy on reforming Washington, D.C., or on building liberty for real societies close to home. That's going to be a fun debate. Be sure to join us. And of course, for all of our presenters that we have just announced for our Liberty for Real dialogue series taking place at the New Hampshire Liberty Forum. And there are more announcements coming in the near future. So get your tickets at nhlibertyforum.com. And thank you again to all of our Porcupine patrons for supporting all that we do with the Free State Project week to week, day to day, including this past weekend as we ventured out to spread the word of the Free State Project to young libertarians at the Students for Liberty LibertyCon this past weekend. Thank you so much to our patrons. I really appreciate it. And if you are not a patron, you can become one, and you can get a Porcupine Patron lapel pin just like this. Go to fsp.org/give, and we have a lot of great benefits for patrons. I would love to count you in. All right, everyone. That's all for today. Furthermore, my opinion is the Federal Reserve should be destroyed.